Dream telepathy. Last night, I had another natural dream in which I was up the avenue, and in the dream, I was looking after a house while the people who owned it went away on holiday. The next thing that I knew, I was outside the house sitting in a car, and I was watching the police storm troop the place in pursuit of an arrest. I got out of the car, and I saw a friend from my childhood get arrested and taken away to the police station. I tried to defend my friend, but to no avail. After he was carted off, everything settled down, and then I awoke. I remember thinking, how and why did I dream that? I mean, it was not wish fulfillment. For I would not want to see my friend arrested, and it was not daily residue either, for I have not seen that friend for 8 years, and he definitely was not on my mind, and I thought to myself, I do not think it would be the manifestation of a trauma. Then I thought, weird. 2 days later I visited my friend Jim, and we were in his car, and he was driving up to see another friend, and as we were driving along we were having a good conversation on various social topics, when he happened to tell me about his uncle who had been arrested. His uncle was none other than my old school friend that I had dreamt that got arrested 2 days prior to the conversation. He told me how his uncle's son had been arrested, and that the father had retaliated, and then he got arrested too. He told me that they were not proud of the incident, and that they were trying to keep it all hushed up, and that only 4 other people outside of his family, who had been there too, knew of his arrest. I told him of my dream, and when we got back, I did not enter the living room, for I stayed in the hall, and he went into his sitting room where his wife and Anita were Saturday. Then, on my request, he asked my girlfriend, who did I dream of who had been arrested 2 days ago, and she told him quite casually the man's name from my dream, and then he told her the news, and we all had fun at the weirdness and its validity. After that we changed the topic, and partied until midnight. I had said to my friend that Anita usually does not remember everything that I tell her. Only this time I think she will remember, because I had dreamt that he was arrested next to an old flame's house of my childhood, whom she loathes, because she has no respect for our relationship, by talking about their past all the time willy-nilly when we used to visit. Soul catcher. Because of the relativity of the trips, and the daily residue above, I have decided to experiment, and see if I can influence the altered states, by creating a musical trigger onto a CD, and playing it when I go under. I have made the music 28 minutes long, and hopefully it can keep playing for the whole of the inner journey. The music also pans from left to right, and right to left speakers on several channels at the same time with different sounds, or triggers. The sound effects stem from sounds like generators, planes and buzzers to whales, angels and a female ethnic singer, who is singing in a self-gratifying manner. The panning is to activate the right and left hemispheres of the brain, and all this is accompanied by happy harmonic melodies, and soft padded chords, with a beat set at 140 beats per minute, which is the same as a human heart, so as it can unify with a party biorhythm. I have laced it with positive affirmations such as enjoy, touch, sex, a walk on the moon, a walk in the park, and outside of me, people think. I want your soul, and hopefully these triggers should create dreamscapes that match accordingly, like one gets from a hypnotist's leading questions when one is under. All I have to do now is to systematically play the CD every time that I go under, and then tick off any of the dreamscape material that correlates with the CD, and this will show, or help me to conclude, if these are dream states, like I suspect, or if they are spiritual in nature, because I am still not 100% certain what to think at this point in time. If I am successful in influencing my altered states with the music, then I think that this will be a breakthrough in both biotech and dream reality. Who needs artificial reality if one can have clarity and influential creative triggers in one's dream reality? Yes, who knows what the future could bring? I have listened to the Creative Visualization CD without the salvia for a few days now, so as I can accustom myself with it. And last night, I had a vivid dream where I was walking along the seafront with a man who told me he was my granddad, and he was telling me that he could not wait until death, and that he preferred a spiritual existence to a physical one. I replied that one could have both, for one can astral travel and enjoy the spiritual at night, and during the day enjoy the physical fruits that come with being awake. He answered by saying that spirit is overshadowed by materialism, power and greed whilst on earth, and those that are not lost to accumulating as much wealth as they can possibly gain in their lives are involved in crime, and that once one has made the crossing one has no such problems, for materialism, power, greed, crime and its paraphernalia are a thing of the past. We then entered a pub in the Old Stein at Brighton, and he had a beer, and he carried on with his conversation by saying that life after life is a pleasure. Just imagine, he said, no more crime, worldly ties and restrictions. And while he was speaking and sipping his beer, I noticed a woman in her 40s enter the bar. The woman came to our table and sat next to me. She told the old man that he must not try to influence my natural path, and that I must follow my life as it is my karma. She went on to say that it is human nature that I must find the joys of both the physical and spiritual, and in the end to live a life well spent, so one is content and does not feel the need to return. She told the old man that he must not try to talk me into a premature crossing again. Then she turned around to face me and showed me her love. I was suddenly propelled back into my teenage years, entering my house with an early girlfriend. I did not know the girlfriend. I think she was archetypal, a symbol of young love. Then I found myself back in the bar, and she showed me a poster outside of the pub's window that was advertising a kung fu spoof, and she said that she would like to see it, and I suddenly felt the impulse to ask her on a date to see the show. I soon realized what she had done. She had showed me that in my wanting to ask her on a date to see the movie, shows what it is like to feel the need to share and love, and that I must gain views outside of my own perspective with love and kindness to help to balance my karma. She had made her point to the old man of my true needs, and told both him and I to live first, and a broader intellect that is fueled by the need to experience the truths that come with loss and growth will follow naturally. Once one has reached the desired level, one does not try to seek solace to escape one's emptiness, loneliness, and one's social needs with a desire to cross over prematurely. For when one is happy with life, everything else falls into place. Now, when I analyzed this dream, it was plain to see what the message was. But who were the old man and the middle-aged woman? Were they spirit guides, or were they manifestations of the CD, which could have been the catalyst for the conversation to persuade me to live in the afterlife? The woman showing me love could have been the words touch, sex and enjoy. The man talking of the brain, was this fueled by people think? Who knows for sure? Trip 8. In this trip, I had a ground control, or a sitter when I played my custom-made CD, if one prefers that name. The sitter is meant to be a watcher, just to make sure that one does not harm oneself when they are under, like me jumping out of the window. I told the sitter to be both still and silent, as their presence destroys any real otherworldly effects. When I went under, the music I found was a distraction to the experience, and so I asked the sitter to turn off the CD, which she did. I did have a short dream experience that I was severed from the top of my jaw down, and the remainder of my head was conscious, and was set into a pavement in a familiar street like a post, or a concrete pylon, like one sees in the road to separate streets, or so that cars do not keep on going up the road. The experience did not last long, and I put it down to the music and the sitter distracting me. The sitter was passive until I looked over in my altered state, and asked her to turn the music off, for she and I had no choice, for the music was bringing me back to my waking consciousness. Trips 9 and 10. I have put these two trips together, because one followed the other, and they were two halves of one whole. I asked the sitter this time to sit on a stool behind me, and no matter how enticing I was when I was in the altered state, I told her that she must not respond to my calls no matter what I say or do. It was 19:30 hours when I first took the salvia, and I finished the cone. As per usual, I placed the pipe on the silver tray next to me, and then I lay back on my bed and got ready for the trip. The next thing that I knew, I found myself again, in a street, only this time, I was up to my waist once more, not my neck. The street was at the top of Bavendian, and as soon as I had begun to feel and experience my situation, I found myself conscious of the light from the fire in my room, and with this knowledge I found myself coming out of the altered state, and back into my room on my bed once more. I checked the time and it was 19:50 hours. I immediately sat up, and administered some more of the salvia and laid back down, only this time, I got the sitter to hand me her brassiere, so as I could cover my eyes from the glow of the fire, so I wouldn't be distracted again, and come out of the trip. The next thing that I knew, I was back in Bavendian, and I began to call out Susie, a childhood's friend's name that lives at that approximate location. I looked over to the sitter, and I could see her, and my old friend at the same time in one person. I was totally overwhelmed by the transfiguration, because they do not look the same in any way whatsoever. At first the sitter tried to remain still, and out of the picture, but with my third attempt to gain her attention, she spoke out. I think it must have been difficult for her, for I had become somewhat frustrated at her denial of my existence, and I thought that she was part of some surreal plot, and that she really belonged to this other state, and was part of their devious plan to disorientate me. I asked her to hold my hand to see where her loyalties lay. If she did not, she was part of their reality, and my usual reality was not reality at all, and if she did hold my hand, then she was my friend, and she was part of my other reality. In this reality that I now found myself in was not the true reality, no matter how real it seemed. As I was looking over, I became aware of harmonic voices behind me speaking in unison. They were accompanying my paranoid thoughts by trying to confuse me, by taunting me that they were real, and my usual reality was not. I realized that they had removed the brassiere from my eyes, and I began to search the bed to find it. Otherwise, I knew that I would awake from the state, and I wanted to prolong the experience. I could not find the bra. In my attempt to locate it, I asked the sitter to help me find it. With my plea, she got up from the stool and helped me search for it, which brought me to. When I came to, I told her off by saying that I had asked her not to respond to me no matter what I said or did. She apologized, and we both searched everywhere for the bra. Eventually, we found it at the bottom of the bed, in between the mattress and the bedstead. Now, I had not sat up when the bra disappeared, for even though I was in an altered state, the sitter was not, and she saw that I did not. Either I had somehow performed a magic trick right under her very nose, or somehow the bra was moved without my actual assistance. I am baffled at how the bra could end up where it did, for the gap between the mattress and bedstead is about a centimeter in width. So, had I somehow miraculously moved it and managed it without sitting up? I must have been moving side to side to slip it in such a difficult spot. Or had someone, or something else from this otherworldly state, or dimension displaced and hid it in a place that it, or they knew would defy logic from my normal state. When I got up and got dressed, the sitter told me that she had heard my mobile phone ringing from the sitting room while I was under. When I checked the telephone number under last 10 calls received, I did not recognize the number, and it was then that I remembered that I had 2 new text messages on my phone that I hadn't read before. I went to my contacts on my mobile phone to search for the caller's number that had phoned me when I was in the altered state, but to no avail. So, I looked at the text messages again, and when I found and read them, it was a text from a couple that live at the top of the Vendian in approximately the same location as my friend Susie that I had both seen and called out from the trip when I saw my sitter as her. I checked the text number, and it was the same number as the missed calls while I was in my bedroom in the altered state. In the text, my friend Carol had written that she had a new mobile phone number, which explained why I did not recognize it in the missed call section. It's uncanny that both friends were raised in Bevendian. And Susie still lives roughly in the same location. So when I saw her transfigured onto my sitter's face, which led to me to calling out her name, and Carol texted me at the same time, or during the trip, is a fine example of some kind of dream telepathy. 3 dreams. I would just like to clarify that I have not taken any salvia for the past few weeks, for I thought that I would take a break for a while. However, in that time I have had 3 more natural dreams and have watched them manifest into Anita's, some of our close friends, my own environment and experience. The first was a dream that I had had about myself being held up at gunpoint by a gang of armed robbers in a bank. The security guards were threatened and herded from one room to another as the bank was robbed. After that, the dream took on a whole new perspective as I was suddenly transformed into the bad guys, and we were on the run with the loot and heading north out of town into the countryside. We got to a point in the road where there was a junction to the right of us, and when we got to the junction, we got out of the van with the money and made our way on foot down a small country road heading east. We traveled with the police in hot pursuit until we entered another junction that ran parallel to our original direction when we were in the van as we left the city, and it was there that we got into a getaway car and began heading north once more. We kept going until we were clear of all the major cities and such, as we entered a private road that led to a country house, or a manor, and it was then that I awoke. Later that day, as I was flipping through the TV channels to see what was on, I happened to catch a reporter state on the early afternoon news that gun crime in Britain was up. And I looked at Anita, of whom I had told the strange dream experience when I awoke, and we both smiled at the validation of the precognitive experience. Then later that week we were at our friend Georgina's flat, when we told her about the experience in our conversation, and she was as euphoric as us when she described a scene from an armed robbery on a security van in the country. She said that she had seen it on the news, and some of the details of the dream correlated with this crime. Then, about a week later, Anita and I saw on the news on TV that 2 men had been arrested for selling guns to criminals. In the footage they showed their haul, and it was a large chest not full of treasure, but full of shotguns and rifles. The man lived in a country manor on a private estate, and he was of a high social pecking order. It went on to say that he had been selling guns for quite some time, and that he had made a considerable profit from armed robbers. One could argue that my precognitive dream should only be an outline for one of the news flashes, and that I could attach it to all three means that either the dream was vague, or I was delusional, or projecting my wish fulfillment onto the news. However, I must stipulate that I was not frantically watching the news for a correlation. It was all linked with an air of randomness and spontaneity as I got on with my daily events. The second link was not even my acknowledgement, as Georgina brought it to our attention. What I am suggesting is that although the news reports on gun crimes in Britain on the surface all appear to be three separate accounts from different times of the week, that they all made the national headlines, be it on different days, and so, this to me is a link like that of, say, three different battlefronts in the same war or invasion. The next dream is beyond weird, and even the blindest skeptic could not deny its spiritual connotations. I had been saving for 6 months, and I had saved £200, so as I could buy a new musical keyboard. I had my goal set on a DJX, which had built-in rhythms that had trip-hop, hip-hop, dance 1 and 2 and even 90s dance on its menu. The night before my shopping trip, a strange dream and scary feeling awoke me. You know, that tingly feeling that makes all one's hairs stand on end, as one is overwhelmed with electricity permeating one's being, and feels the presence of an apparition. My initial feeling was that a ghost was either trying to disturb my sleep and gain my attention for spiritual aid, and it had awoken me, or it was trying to enter my body and possess me while I was asleep, like what happened to John when he was in the car park frantically racing back to his body. It was then that I remembered the dream that I had just awoken from, and I thought to myself that perhaps it was an astral body, or a ghost of the living. The reason why I say this is because in the dream, I was walking along a street that also felt like a tunnel, and a man who works in the guitar, amp and keyboard shop in town had walked by, and he did not acknowledge me as he passed. I instantly turned and called out to him, for he was well within earshot. He did not turn around straight away, and I thought that he was ignoring me, so I spat out some abuse and proceeded with my journey. Then, I heard him call back in response, as I awoke from the dream. The ghostly presence, or the eerie feeling, dissolved as I shifted my awareness to all the possible ramifications of the dream. Guy, which is the name of the man from the music shop, did not work in the music shop that I had had my sights set on the following day. Then I thought that perhaps I had somehow connected with his spirit with my AKA threads, and had summoned his soul into my room, and that once I had awoken that he simply spiritually wandered off into God knows where. I thought that perhaps it was daily residue, for I was going to buy a keyboard the following day, and even though I was not going to obtain it from his shop, he could have been unleashed by my own curiosity from my subconscious. His ignoring me could have been his response to my overlooking his shop. Next I thought, maybe it was a synchronicity, and that being the case perhaps I should check out his shop, and see if they had the same keyboard for a cheaper price. The next day came, and I had monetary complications when a check did not clear in my bank. It took me until late in the day to sort it out, and then being pressed for time, I chose to ignore the dream, and just stick to my original plan, and go to the shop that I had initially targeted, which is in Portslade. When I got to the shop, it was already closed, so I travelled back on the bus in a foul mood at having missed its opening hours, with Anita trying to console me by telling me that it would still be there tomorrow. As we got off the bus, and began to make our way home, then whom should we bump into, but Guy, the man from the dream who works in the other shop. We just said hello and passed because I did not feel like chatting, as I had missed the shop, and he had probably had a hard day and was making his way home. Then, the realization dawned on me, and I decided to seize the opportunity and ask him if he had any decent keyboards in his shop at present. When I turned and called, he was still in earshot, but he was probably lost in thought, for whatever reason, and so, he did not hear my shout. It took 2 more shouts until he finally turned around, and became aware that it was I that was trying to gain his attention. He made his way back, and I asked him my question, and he told me that he did not work in that section, so I should perhaps, if interested, take a look tomorrow for myself. I told him of the dream experience, and he was taken aback in deep thought. I chronologically dictated the sequences of my thoughts that pursued the dream. And when I had got to the second thought, after being mystified by the first, he jumped to the proposal of daily residue, so I suggested that it could also be a synchronicity, or a precognitive experience, and his mind was open and mystified. I told him that I would look in his shop tomorrow to see their range of keyboards. The next day, I went to the first shop to buy what my heart desired, and the DJX was not in stock as they had stopped making them, so I could only pick one up second hand if I still wanted one. The man phoned a neighboring shop in another town, but to no avail, and I was truly disappointed. Subsequently, I got back on the bus and made my way to Guy's shop, and when I got there it had no DJXs in it either, so I became depressed. Next, I went to another keyboard shop in my twin towns, and they did not have one either. When I got home, I thought about the dream, and what it could have been, or meant, and I talked it through with Anita, and we both came to the conclusion of none of the above suspicions that we had previously presupposed, or postulated. However, we both agreed, because of the location, in which I had bumped into Guy, that the road has a row of tall buildings at either side of it. And it could resemble a tunnel in a dream. And because of my calling him back after he had passed, and him not hearing my calls until it was impossible to not hear, and that the keyboard was not at his shop, that the dream was a precognition of our chance meeting the following day after the dream, and my first venture back from the original music shop. After that, I had a strange dream where my friend Georgina brought to my flat a new boyfriend, and he was a young man. He acted out by acting like a teenage gangster, as he began to shout and act disorderly, where he eventually ended up sticking a knife in a water boiler. I told Georgina to get him to behave, and at that she stomped over to him and role-played mother. As she was playing mother, I saw that everything was under control, and it was then that I awoke with a strange feeling throughout my being, and I thought that I could have been astral traveling. The next day, a friend called Barry, Anita, Georgina and I were going to see Lamb play in concert. I told Anita of the dream on our way to Georgina's flat. When we arrived, I told Georgina about the dream, and we tried to see if it was a plain dream, or if it was spiritual in nature. We often share our dreams to see if they have any correlations, and if they have, then we either categorize them as coincidence, cultural relativity, or spiritual. We did not share any correlations, not that she could recall, and so, we just put it down to a typical dream that had surrealistically arrived from my unconscious. We took some philosopher's stone, which is a magic mushroom that I bought from a legal high shop earlier that day, and set out to watch the concert. When we were at the venue, and the band was in full flight, a high T-male barged his way into our group, and tried to hit on Georgina. She had recently broken up with her long-standing boyfriend because he had an alcohol problem, and the drink brought out an abusive side to his nature accompanied with schizophrenia. So I kept a protective watch for her safety without interfering, in case I imposed. The man turned and looked at me as he tried scaremonger tactics to ward me off. He did not know if we were friends. He was just muscling in, and it was then that I gazed directly into his boyish face, and he quickly turned away, for he knew that I was not going to be bullied, because I was full of self-confidence. He then put his hood up that was attached to his top, and did not look back. He eventually plucked up the courage to ask Georgina if she had a lighter, of which she affirmed, and lent it to him, so as he could light his cigarette. He became aware that she was part of our group when we showed our appraisal of the band and the awesome effects of magic mushrooms, and after seeing this he decided to move on. After the gig we talked about that scenario, and Georgina said that she had witnessed it, and that she was actually flattered. She said that he was soft and boyish, of which I confirmed, and added the other side of his nature that he tried to impose on me. I only mentioned it because Anita had witnessed the whole episode, and even though it meant that I would be shattering my friend's illusion or romanticism of the event, I simply had to go with the truth. I said what he had done, and that when he stared at me he had a boyish face with a gangster's nature. Within the time of him trying to scare me, and finding us chatting, and realizing that we were close friends, he had screamed out loud to show his dominance, although he had tried to disguise it by directing it at the band, and when his scream came out his voice sounded as if he were prepubescent. The conversation changed topic as we got stoned on marijuana. And we got really high as the potency was increased because of the mushrooms, and we listened to trip hop, and no more was said on the subject. Only that I had concluded by saying that, if that happens again, that I would stay back and let Georgina play out her role freely unimpeded. That night, when we got home, it suddenly dawned on me that I had had another precognitive dream. For example, the boy gangster, my friend feeling flattered, and my saying in future that she could deal with it, could be connected to the dream. Anita and I sat there amazed by the above experience, and I wondered if this was somehow the after effects of the salvia, or had I been having these experiences before, but was not aware of them until recently, because I've been analyzing my dreams. Now, just the other day, after these events that I have just mentioned, I read in a book a chapter on shamans, and apparently the Aborigines believe that dream time is the real world, and that when one is awake it is far less important, which would coincide with the feelings that I have experienced when under the influence of salvia. Afterwards, the chapter went on to say that many shamans worldwide and throughout history have suggested that once one has dealt with their personal demons in their dreams, that one's ESP is enhanced and vivid when one awakes from sleep. It got me thinking that my personal dream demons are, with the help of salvia, are being uncovered, decoded and integrated into my conscious waking world, and that could be the reason for the precognitive dream experiences that I have been having lately. Then, I thought that when people are under hypnosis, that they can bring on their ESP experiences by connecting to their subtle selves, and once open they are able to carry it over into psychic experiences without the help of a hypnotist. Edgar Cayce was just one of the many psychics that was opened up with hypnotism connecting him to his ESP. Further, when mediums accelerate their vibrations to match the spiritual beings, the spirits tune into their lower vibrations to meet the mediums in a halfway house in between both sides of the veil, so as they can converse with the physical world. When the post-mortal relatives and friends turn up in the dreams of the living in a crisis apparition to either show them that they are still alive and well, or to inform them of their departure for closure, they are in the same theta dream state. I decided that I would start taking the salvia again tomorrow and see what kind of pleasure, torment, or shenanigans that it would bring, and I couldn't help feeling ecstatic at the thought of administering it and seeing the outcome as the trips unfolded, and I went to sleep with a broad smile on my face. Trip 11. The time was 17:55 hours when I administered the salvia, only this time I had decided to try another approach. I was well aware of the effects that MDMA had on one's brain's chemistry. It makes one's neurons fire serotonin and oxytocin, which brings on chemical love and bonding. However, one ends up by paying a karmic debt the following day, resulting in a depletion of the brain's chemicals, which leads to depression. The way I figured it was when administering the salvia, when depressed, that the trip wouldn't be as nerve-wracking and discombobulating. My theory was right, for I drifted off into the dream reality in an ambient mood. When I found myself in the dream reality, I still found myself in the terror zone. However, because the dream was influenced by the brain's chemistry, I just did not care. I did not get overwhelmed by the terror zone, and I did not try to convince myself that everything was okay. I just began to laugh, and I laughed hysterically at what I was experiencing. I remember slowly orientating and laughing myself awake. When I awoke, I noticed, and then confirmed with my sitter, that only 5 minutes had passed on the clock. The sitter told me that I had been laughing manically for the full 5 minutes. I then, having awoken, sat up and inhaled another cone of salvia. Trip 12. As I took the second dose, I reiterated that the sitter must not respond to me in any way, so as not to influence my mentality. As I was stating this, and drifting off, she responded with an okay followed by a good night. I tried to eject it from my mind as I was going under, and I knew that, if it did not clear, that I would be caught out, and my trip would be influenced. I thought to myself that I should tell her that she broke the curfew, and that the trip was in jeopardy. So, I quickly remedied her mistake by an act of meditation to clear my mind, which placed me back on the correct spiritual path. My mind seemed to have 1,000 thoughts racing through it all at once, and then they were bottlenecked as they surfaced into my awareness. Eventually, the meditation did its job. My mind cleared and I found myself in a very calm ambient state. The lack of serotonin took away the unconscious part of the transformation, and it left me feeling tranquil and comfortable, because there was no need for orientation from the usual unconscious state. Basically, my inner critical faculty, or my noisy judgmental mind, had the night off, so I just lay there in a comfortable ambient state of mind. I could not feel my body, and there was not a hint of dream images whatsoever to cloud my psyche, or delude me. I was not truly aware of the duration that I was under, but I knew that it had extended its usual time frame. As the state progressed, I began to feel my energy body, and I connected my mind with it in the same way that one does with self-hypnotic suggestion, or meditation, when one feels a specific part of one's body, and then changes the body part from the crown to the base chakra, tuning into my spirit with concentration, awareness and my imagination. I could not feel my physical being at all. I felt like I had shifted my awareness into my ethereal spiritual doppelganger. My consciousness traveled up and down my spirit body, coming in on down through my crown chakra, then throughout my whole being, splitting off into 3 forces at my heart chakra, as two branched off down my arms to my hands. The other one traveled down through the rest of my cherkas until it separated and became two at the base of my spine, which then traveled down my legs to the base of my feet. Next, the energy returned from where they had just come from, resulting in them all uniting along the way en route to my crown chakra. The energy oscillated in this manner for quite some time, and I was bathed in bliss until I eventually awoke. When I awoke, I was rather shocked to see that 1 hour and 20 minutes had gone by in this second trip, for the time was 19.20 hours. Trip 13. It was 7 p.m. hours, and I had administered the salvia, and I was waiting for the trip. Suddenly, I felt like I was a child, and I was at my brother's home in Bristol Estate, and at the same time at my childhood house in Bevendian. I felt like I was half a body from the waist up, and I was stuck in a wall at the side of a pathway leading to a front door at the edge of the garden. I could hear both family and friends of the family that lived in the close vicinity calling to me. I had my back to them, and I couldn't turn around to face them, so I don't know who was actually calling. Although I couldn't quite hear what they were actually saying, it seemed to make sense to me on a deeper level. They seemed to be chanting over and over the same message, and they were tugging on a washing line that was tied around my waist, and they were pulling me toward them. This went on for quite some time, until I came out of the trip. Trip 14. I have clustered together a plethora of similar trip experiences here in one entry, and I have removed the beginnings to avoid repetition. I found myself falling down into a garden at the side of a path, and I felt layers of pavements flipping on top of me. It was like I was a spider stuck in the pages of a book, and someone was flipping through them, only they were gardens. I could hear these maternal voices chanting, "Many old years the floor makes," over and over again. When I came to, I had not turned the light off, and that is what must have brought me out of it so quick. When I got up, the pipe was spilt on the floor, so I must have passed out when I went into the trip. Luckily, I landed on the bed, otherwise I could have damaged myself in the fall. Then on the following trip, I was on my back lying horizontal upon a sheet in a garden facing a house, and I could hear "The Only Boy Who Whoopslayed" in my head by a chorus of high-pitched voices, which I took to be women, and it sounded like it was coming from all around me in the street. I could feel what I took to be my mother tugging at my sheet, causing my feet to go up in the air as she pulled me into the house. It was then that a local newspaper delivery person interrupted me as they posted the leader through the front door's letterbox, which suddenly took me out of the trip. And in the next trip, I was on my back again, and I was in a garden outside a row of terraced houses, and I felt like I was being watched by the people of the street, who were chanting inaudibly, and I had the sense that they all knew me like my neighbors in my childhood when I was growing up. I also had the sense that I truly belonged with them, and that it was silly to think anything else. I lay there for a while, and then I came out of the trip. And finally, that was amazing. I found myself in the now familiar surroundings, in the same experience as before, with the row of terraced houses and gardens, with the friends and family behind me chanting. Apparently, on this trip, while being observed by a non-tripper, or Timothy Leary's ground control, who was behind having the correct set and setting, which was the need to have a comfortable environment for the perfect trip. I slid down off of the bed, sat on the floor, laid down, then I got up and walked to the bedroom doorway, bent over in half, rested on a suitcase, and then I went back to the bed and laid down on it. Basically, I was sleepwalking. Trip 15. Today, I found myself on my back on a sheet in a familiar garden that was part of a terrace, or a row of terraced houses and gardens that belonged to my childhood. In the garden I could hear and feel a congregation of familiar people all calling or chanting to me. I felt their joint expectancy that I should do something, and I had a kinship with them, and at the same time, I had an affinity to my waking world. It was as if I was on the brink of two worlds, but the salvia world was where I truly belonged. I took the salvia, and I found myself back in the garden again, and I could hear the people calling out to me from behind, both up and down the street. When I was in the garden, I had a real sense of belonging, like I had when I was in my childhood and teens, and all the neighbors knew my family and myself. I felt like I was on show, and that I was expected to lie down on the pathway at the side of the garden. I came out of this trip in the sitting room, when I was sat upon the sofa. Apparently, I had walked unconsciously, or in a somnambulistic state, into the sitting room, like I was a ghost from the bedroom. I had bumped into Anita as she tried to get out of my way, and then I had moaned at her for ruining my trip, and I sat down on the sofa and tried to lie down. After that, I went back into the bedroom, but although I was still under the influence of the trip, it was nearly over, and I was regaining my full awareness. After the trip, I remembered sitting on my sofa and looking at my bookcase with my DVDs on display, and this began to sober me up, because I knew that they could not be in the garden, and that they were from my conscious world, which made me aware of it. So I came to. When under the influence of the salvia, I am in two distinct worlds. The objective world, where I am carrying on doing menial habits, like walking to the sitting room from the bedroom that I frequently do in my waking world, and sitting down on the sofa, which is also a daily routine of mine, as I always sit on that particular sofa to watch the television. Then, in my subjective world, where I am in the garden with my neighbors and friends who are trying to get my attention, I broke the mold, which was to leave the garden. This is accompanied by a sense of truly belonging, for I was like a ghost oblivious to the external world, walking around and doing menial routines and habits, or like a lost soul trapped in their own mind in the sub somewhere between the physical planes of existence and spiritual heaven.